The sound of laughter from my own dining room stopped me cold, because I knew that laugh. It was Chase's, my son-in-law's, the one he used when he was putting on a show for others at my expense. I stepped inside, still holding the grocery bag with a small chocolate cake I'd bought for my own birthday, and there he was, leaning back in my chair, telling our neighbors that I was lucky he let me stay in his house since he handled all the important bills. My daughter Lila sat beside him, eyes down, tracing the rim of her coffee cup instead of defending me. I didn't shout, didn't argue. I just felt something shift inside me, the kind of shift you don't come back from. What I didn't know was that this was only the first crack in a wall about to collapse, and that the laughter I heard that day would be the last time he ever mocked me in my own home. Before I tell you how I went from swallowing that humiliation to building a plan that would change everything, make sure you're subscribed if this is your first time here, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because I want to know how far stories like this travel. My name is Nora Whitaker, and this all began in a quiet Asheville neighborhood, in the little craftsman house my late husband and I built, piece by piece, where I thought family meant something, until I learned the hard way it didn't. The following Sunday, Lila invited me to brunch, saying a few of the neighbors would be there and that it would be good for us to all get on the same page. I should have known something was off when I walked into my own kitchen and saw Chase at the head of the table, my seat, grinning like he'd just closed the deal of a lifetime. The smell of cinnamon rolls and brewed coffee hung in the air, but it felt stale the moment he slid a thick packet of papers toward me. "We need you to sign this, Nora," he said, tapping the top page with a smug rhythm. "It's a care agreement. Protects you legally and makes sure the property is handled properly." I glanced at the fine print and felt my stomach turn. It gave him control of the deed, my bank access, even the right to sell without my consent. My voice was steady when I said, "No," but my hands were shaking under the table. He laughed, a short, sharp sound that made the neighbors shift uncomfortably. "Then maybe it's time you start packing your room tonight," he said, his tone light enough for the table, but with a knife's edge just for me. I looked at Lila, searching for the girl who used to braid my hair in the mornings before school, but she just kept her eyes on her plate, murmuring something about making things easier for everyone. I excused myself, walked out to the workshop in the backyard, and closed the door behind me. The air smelled of cedar shavings and motor oil, the scent of every project my late husband and I had built together. In the far corner, his initials, J.W., were still carved into the workbench, a little faded but deep enough to outlast us both. My fingers traced those letters, and I knew I was done begging to be treated with basic respect in a house I had built and paid for. I pulled down the old canvas duffel from the shelf, the one we used on camping trips, and began folding clothes in neat, deliberate stacks. As I zipped it shut, I didn't feel like I was leaving my home. I felt like I was taking the first step toward taking my life back. That afternoon, I drove to a bare-bones state park cabin 30 minutes away, unloaded my bag onto the creaky bed, and sat in the silence, letting the weight of years of small humiliations sink in. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I just stared at the knot in the pine wall in front of me and thought, "You've been the safety net for too long, Nora. Time to cut the ropes." The first night in that drafty cabin, I lay awake listening to the wind rattle the thin windows, thinking about every bill I'd paid, every favor I'd done, every time I'd told myself, it's just what family does, when Chase and Lila leaned on me yet again. By sunrise, the decision was made. I wasn't going to play the role of victim in my own story. I brewed the bitter instant coffee the cabin kept in a dusty tin, sat at the wobbly little table, and began making a list. At the top, shut off every dollar they can touch. I opened my laptop, logged into my accounts, and one by one canceled the automatic transfers for their mortgage, utilities, and car insurance. My fingers shook, not from hesitation, but from the rush of finally taking back control. Then I called each bank to remove Lila as an authorized user on my credit cards, picturing Chase's face the moment his next charge got declined. Midway through the calls, my phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. "Mrs. Whitaker?" "This is Avery Cole." We met years ago when you drove my bus to middle school. I work at the county recorder's office now. I think you should know someone's been trying to file a quitclaim deed on your property in your name." My heart clenched, but her calm, no-nonsense tone steadied me. We arranged to meet that afternoon, and when we did, she slid a copy of the attempted filing across the cafe table. There was Chase's signature, forged in sloppy loops, and Lila's name typed neatly beside his. Avery told me she'd flagged it and blocked it, but warned me he might try again. On the walk back to my car, I crossed paths with a tall, older man I'd seen on the trails near the cabin, Mr. Harlan. We struck up a conversation, and when I mentioned my situation, he revealed he was a retired judge. He explained exactly how to start documenting harassment, what statutes applied to property fraud, and how to get a no-contact order if Chase pushed too far. By the time the sun dipped behind the Blue Ridge, my plan had shifted from vague defiance to a concrete strategy. Cut the money, secure the paper trail, and quietly collect enough evidence to make sure that when I struck, it would be final. In the dim cabin light that night, I labeled a folder on my desktop, "For the Sheriff." 2 days into cutting them off, the retaliation began. First came the social media smear campaign, Chase posting on Facebook that I was losing my grip and being manipulated by shady people who wanted my house, complete with a blurry photo of me carrying my duffel bag like I was running away from the law. Lila shared it to her own feed with a caption about protecting family from outside influences, which stung more than I wanted to admit. Then the phone calls started. Creditors I'd never heard of, demanding payment on loans Chase had apparently taken out, all with my address listed as his residence. When I explained he didn't live with me anymore, some believed me, others didn't care. The final straw came in the form of a bright orange rent due notice taped to the cabin door, printed on cheap paper with no official letterhead. Mr. Harlan confirmed it was a scare tactic, but it still made my pulse spike. I started double locking the door at night. The real showdown came at the Saturday farmers market. I was weighing tomatoes when Chase appeared out of nowhere, his voice low but venomous. "We both know you can't handle all this stress, Nora. Sign the deed over. I'll take care of everything." I told him to step back, but he leaned in closer, the smell of beer heavy on his breath, and whispered, "If you think you can win, you're underestimating me." What he didn't realize was that my phone was recording the whole time, the red dot tucked behind a photo app so it looked like nothing was happening. His voice, clear as day, admitting he wanted the deed, was now safely saved in my files. That night in the cabin, I almost broke my own rule. My hand hovered over the keyboard, wanting to send Lila a message, remind her of all the nights I stayed up sewing her prom dress, the mornings I packed her lunch when we barely had groceries ourselves. But I knew where that road led. Instead, I dragged the audio file into the For the Sheriff folder and sat back, listening to the wind push against the walls. This wasn't just about a house anymore. This was about making sure Chase never had the chance to pull this on anyone else. The opportunity to turn everything on its head came quicker than I expected. A week later, the town council held an open forum at the Civic Center. Chase never missed those, loved strutting to the mic to talk about revitalizing neighborhoods and protecting property rights. I sat in the back, my binder clutched tight, waiting until his turn ended and the smirk was still fresh on his face. When they called my name, I walked to the podium, set down the binder, and began speaking in the same calm, steady tone I used to use when disciplining rowdy kids on my school bus. I told the room I'd spent the last 4 years paying a mortgage, insurance, and utilities for a house I already owned outright because my daughter and son-in-law claimed they were catching up after hard times. I showed the time-stamped receipts, line after line in black ink, projected on the big screen behind me. The murmur in the room grew louder when Avery Cole, sitting in the front row, stood and confirmed that Chase had recently tried to file a fraudulent quitclaim deed, her voice cutting through the air like a gavel strike. Then, without breaking eye contact with him, I pulled out my phone, tapped play, and let the market day recording echo through the hall. "If you think you can win, you're underestimating me. Sign the deed over. I'll take care of everything." The silence that followed was thick, only broken by the sound of chairs shifting and someone muttering, "Oh my God." A council member leaned toward the clerk and whispered something, then turned back to me and said, "Mrs. Whitaker, please forward all of this to the district attorney's office." Right on cue, a sheriff's deputy stepped into the room, papers in hand. The emergency protective order Mr. Harlan had helped me prepare. He walked straight to Chase, served him, and told him he had 30 minutes to vacate my property and stay 500 feet away from me at all times. Chase's face drained from red to chalk white. His mouth opened, closed, but no sound came out. Lila's eyes darted between us, her hand frozen halfway to her face. I gathered my binder, thanked the council, and walked out into the bright afternoon, the buzz of whispered conversations trailing me all the way to my car. For the first time in years, I felt taller than him, not because I'd shouted the loudest, but because I'd spoken the truth and let it do the work. By Monday morning, the fallout had already started to take shape. Chase's revitalize the neighborhood persona crumbled overnight. His so-called partners in the house-flipping business cut ties after the DA confirmed they were reviewing the quitclaim deed attempt and the audio recording. The local paper ran a front-page story on property fraud allegations at Town Forum, and though my name was kept out of the headline, everyone knew. His real estate license hearing was fast-tracked, and by the end of the month, it was gone. Lila called twice in those early days, once to say she needed time to think, and once to quietly admit she'd only just learned about Chase's gambling debts and that her name was tied to several of his credit accounts. I listened, but didn't rescue her this time. I told her she needed to speak to a lawyer, not her mother, about her next steps. That silence on the line was the sound of a bridge not burning completely, but no longer holding her weight. With the property safe and Chase legally barred from coming within 500 feet, I took my next step. Sold the backyard cottage to a young couple starting out, using part of the proceeds to create the Whitaker Workshop Fund, small grants for local trade school graduates who'd aged out of foster care. It felt right, turning what had been a hiding place for Chase's broken promises into a starting point for someone else's life. I also updated my will, ensuring my main house would one day become a women's transitional apprenticeship home run by a nonprofit I trusted. There were quieter victories, too, walking into the hardware store without whispers of pity, hearing Mr. Harlan call me formidable with a smile, and finding Avery's thank you card in my mailbox for trusting her to help. I had carved out a life again, not as someone's safety net or easy mark, but as a woman who chose where her time, money, and trust went. Chase had lost his reputation, his access to my home, and the illusion of control. Lila had lost her marriage and her illusions, too. Me? I'd lost the constant knot in my stomach and found the solid ground under my own feet again. 6 months later, the house was alive with a different kind of noise. Hammering from the workshop, laughter from the porch, the smell of fresh coffee drifting out of the kitchen, where 3 women from the apprenticeship program were making breakfast before their carpentry class. The garden beds out back were overflowing with tomatoes and herbs, the same soil that once felt like a battleground, now feeding new beginnings. I'd settled into a rhythm, mornings in the workshop teaching basic tool safety, afternoons in my own little cabin at the state park where I still spent a few nights a week just for the peace of it. Lila started showing up again, cautiously at first. No requests for money, no defenses of Chase, just coffee in hand and a willingness to listen. We talked about boundaries, about what trust actually means when you've broken it, and I made it clear there'd be no inheritance tied to our reconciliation. She surprised me by agreeing and even volunteering at the apprenticeship home twice a week. I didn't know if forgiveness was fully possible yet, but the door was open, and that was enough for now. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the Blue Ridge and cast the porch in gold, I hung my late husband's old measuring tape above the workshop door. It had been his symbol of doing things right the first time, of building with care. Looking at it now, I realized that's what I'd done, rebuilt my life with the same patience and precision. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Love without respect is just dependency wearing a mask, and giving without boundaries is a slow kind of self-erasure. You can survive humiliation, betrayal, and loss, but only if you choose yourself in the end. And choosing yourself doesn't mean shutting the world out. It means deciding who gets to walk in. As the laughter from the porch mixed with the sounds of hammers in the workshop, I knew I'd opened my life to the right people this time. I had my peace, my dignity, and a home that was once again truly mine, not because of walls and deeds, but because of the people and purpose it now sheltered. At its heart, this story is a reminder that self-respect is not something you hand over for the sake of keeping the peace. It's something you protect, even if it means walking away from people you love. Injustice doesn't always arrive as a dramatic betrayal. Often it creeps in quietly through unspoken expectations, one-sided sacrifices, and the kind of silence that keeps toxic patterns alive. Breaking that silence takes courage, and so does facing the reality that some relationships, no matter how close in blood, may be built more on dependency and control than on genuine care. Choosing to confront wrongdoing, setting clear boundaries, and taking back control of your life isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your dignity and creating space for healthier connections to grow. And while that choice can come with heartbreak, it also opens the door to a peace that's deeper than the comfort of avoiding conflict. It's a lesson in understanding human nature, that people's choices reveal their values, and that fairness sometimes means letting consequences fall where they belong. In life, you can't always control how others treat you, but you can control whether you accept it. And when you choose to value yourself, you're not only protecting your future, you're showing others, including those who may have hurt you, what true respect looks like. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to set a boundary that changed a relationship? Tap like if you believe in the power of standing up for yourself, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more true-to-life, dramatic, and thought-provoking stories like this one. Until next time, may you find your own calm after the storm.